Welcome to the new Atlas. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me today is Carl Zha. He is a historian, podcaster, and he has a very prolific presence on Twitter. Also joining me from Moscow is Mark Sleboda. He is an international relations and security expert. I've had both of these guests on separately in the past. Now they are together. And today we will be talking about Russian-Chinese relations. First of all, starting with you, Carl, because you're in the middle, and then Mark, how are you doing? And what is your take on what's going on, right? You know, an overview on how you see things going between Russia and China.
I'm glad we're having this conversation because a lot of the times when I read analysis from U.S. pundit think tankers, when they talk in the context of Sino-Russian relationship, it almost seems to them the Sino-Soviet split is still going on. I mean, like they really think this is still 1970s. So it's good that we're here to bring people up to date to like what is going on in 2022 Sino-Russian relationship. So thank you for the invite, Brian. It's good to finally meet you, Mark. You know, I see you on Twitter all the time. It's good to finally see you in person.
Likewise.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm alive. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Yeah. I'm also very glad to be having this discussion because I think that Russian-Chinese relations, Sino-Russian relations, if you want to go with the argot, is the most important international relationship in the world today, bar none, right? This is the make or break relationship for a future of a multipolar world escaping from the grasp of unipolar hegemony. If this relationship fails, then I don't know where the next hope is for generations. If this hope succeeds, it could set the tone of that multipolar world. So I think it's really important. And I think it's great for the three of us to be having this discussion because we were all, raised in the United States, I believe, correctly, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And we are all expats who have the unusual perspective compared to most U.S. foreign policy experts of living outside of the United States. And Brian and I are both veterans on top of that. And Brian went to Thailand, which is right there in Asia. Long history of relations, of course, with China, also with Russia. And Carl of the Chinese diaspora went home. I know you're in Indonesia now and Bali, but you're close enough there, and I know you're fully integrated with your relations in China. And
close enough that yesterday when my kid got sick and started coughing, we were able to find a Chinese medicine shop and get Chinese medicinal ingredients. So yeah.
Hopefully not pangolin scales or anything.
No, it's leaf, herbal. It's a loquat leaves for coughing.
Yeah, and I'm a Slavic mutt, but my ancestry is Russian and Slovak, and I also felt a call to blood to come home to the motherland, and then I've felt that all my life. And I know your wife, Carl, is Indonesian, and my wife is Crimean, and I think we add a lot of value added perspective that a lot of people don't hear. And may I just say, I follow your work all the time, not just Silk and Steel, but all your Twitter posts, not just the political stuff, but the culture, the food, the Chinese historical garb culture, which I love because my wife and I are both into historical garb culture ourselves, not the Chinese, of course, but so I really have been a long time follower and lover of your tone, your lovely sense of sarcasm on Twitter. So I'm glad to be here with both of you as well.
Okay, so Mark, you actually give a good starting point. You're saying that this is one of the most important relationships, or the most important relationship geopolitically. I agree with you. A lot of people in the West, Western analysts, claim that there's too many differences between Russia and China for this to be a durable, enduring relationship, ideologically, culturally, politically. And Russia is just getting involved with China. They have no choice. China is on the losing end because look at Russia, how poorly they're doing in Ukraine. They're so weak. This is what I've been hearing from across the West. So maybe let's start with Carl. Ideologically, culturally, politically, do you really feel like there are unreconcilable differences between Russia and China that would prevent them from creating an enduring relationship, partnership?
My mic just went offline. Sorry. I think right now, can you guys hear me okay? Right now?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually think the current China-Russian relationship, it has been the most stable relationship in the whole Sino-Russian history. Because why? Because the current relationship is based on mutual interest. It's a interest-based relationship, unlike, say, during the Sino-Soviet honeymoon period or the Sino-Soviet split during the Cold War. That was more ideological based. Today, it's based on mutual interest, and that is the most stable relationship. And right now, China-Russia, the economy is complementary. Russia is an energy producer, a commodity producer. China is an energy commodity consumer. Their economy perfectly complement each other. There's it's not even like China and United States. Maybe like they compete in tech or they compete in manufacturing. It's not like that. So there's very few area of contention, both in the economic sphere and in international diplomatic fields, because we all being well aware that United States is waging this crazy multi-front war against any potential competitors, challenger to the U.S. hegemony. So this is a real reason why U.S. is engaging in hostile relation. It's engaging hostile relationship against both Russia and China at the same time. I mean, a lot of people look at this. This is crazy, but this is a logic of hegemony. It is what it is, and this is another reason that's really shaping the Sino-Russian relationship, because since the collapse of Soviet Union, both Russia and China have tried to engage United States to have a cooperative engagement. But that had failed because U.S. is the one that refused to engage with Russia, refused to engage with China. It prefers to have China and Russia in a subordinate position in this its so-called rule-based international order. But Russia and China, they're huge countries. They're proud people. There's no way they're going to subjugate themselves to the U.S. hegemony. And that's a real reason the U.S. has been increasingly hostile toward Russia and China in the past decades. And that definitely is one of the driver toward the closeness of Russia-China relationship. But that's not the only driver. As I mentioned before, economic-wise, it makes perfect sense for Russia and China to cooperate. And Russia for Russia's strategic focus is still Europe, right? And China it's the Pacific. It's facing the Pacific, and Russia and China share a very long border and a peaceful border. This very peaceful border between China and Russia is of strategic importance to both. I mean, this is one of the reasons why U.S. played the China card during the Cold War. When it leveraged the Sino-Soviet split, because U.S. realized it could get China on its side against the Soviet Union. you gain a powerful ally, and also you gain open a separate front against Soviet Union, right? But right now that's bridge underwater. I mean, a lot of people in the United States don't realize since late 1980, ever since Gorbachev visited China, the relationship has been great. I mean, since late Soviet Union to establishment of Russia, the two sides have great relationship. There's really no quarrel diplomatically. Both sides have resolved a long-standing border issue in the 2000s. And right, I mean, it's really crazy to see some Western pundits still bringing out like some border issue. Like, no, the border issue was resolved in 2000. Just because you weren't paying attention doesn't mean it didn't happen. and so right now, there's no reason for the two sides to be antagonistic to each other. I mean, okay, if my idealist self thinks there's no reason for United States to be antagonistic toward either, but that's not how the Pentagon or the blob works in Washington. They only care about their careers, and their career is making tensions and creating trouble. But yeah, I mean, I think the currently the current relationship since 1990s has been most stable since forever.
Okay, and Mark, I would like to hear your thoughts on this same issue.
Yep.
Why do you think the West thinks that there's some sort of irreconcilable difference between Russia and China, despite what we do see playing out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll take us back to anecdotally to 2010, and I was doing my dissertation at the LSE on international relations theory, focusing on Russian and Eurasian studies. And one of the not my dissertation, but one of the minor papers I did for one of my units there was on Russian-Chinese relations. And I think even back then, I realized the importance of it. And this was just about the time that one of the principal Russia-Chinese thinkers, a clown in the West known as Bobo Lo, came out with his book on Russian and Chinese relations. And there was a lot of factual stuff in there, but as soon as he got into projecting the course and the nature of those relations and everything, he was, he falls back on this ubiquitous Western wishful thinking, right? And that's what it is. Russia and Chinese interests have to diverge, right? And break up this relationship, because ultimately the alternative is too horrible for them to contemplate, right? And there was a time, even back, say, go back to 2010, where it still could have been possible for Russian-Chinese relations to diverge if the U.S. had done what Henry Kissinger actually said that the U.S. needed to do back when he helped engineer the Sino-Soviet split. He said, this is great, but in 20 years, we'll have to reverse it. We'll have to team up with Russia against China. It was actually about 30 years. But I mean, he was dead right in geopolitical terms. And I believe wholeheartedly that the Sino-Soviet split, more than any other single factor, was what led to the U.S., the West, winning the Cold War, such as that means. But this time around, both, I don't think that the Russian-Chinese leadership are, again, I think Carl Zha hit it right on. They're not ideological. They're pragmatic. They're both cynical, technocratic, and they both have their eyes on the long term. There was that moment I think where the U.S. particularly could have gone either way, really, but particularly the Russian elite would have been more than willing to jump in with the West if the bare minimum of a show of respect to Russia's interests in its near broad had been recognized. If that bare minimum hadn't been met, I mean, let's be honest, up until really this last year, but it started to deteriorate back in 2014. But the Russian elite, right? A lot of them, they had their villas, their nice homes, their vacation resorts in Europe, right? In Europe, in London, in Italy, in Cyprus. They sent their kids to Western universities to learn, right? That was really, really prevalent. Now that's not the case, and I am very, very thankful for that fact. Now, there have always been Chinese students who have studied in Russia. When I was studying here at MGMO and MGU, the two biggest schools in Moscow, particularly with regards to international relations, anyway, there were Chinese students there then. The same is true, yes, with Russians in China, but nowhere near that level. And I want Russian and Chinese students, I want the elite of both countries to be, a certain percentage of them to be interchanging. I want every Russian student to be learning Chinese. I say that from someone who had aspirations of one day learning Chinese, and then realized the limitations of my brain, particularly with regards to languages. And I'll be happy if I ever fully master Russian in this lifetime. The Chinese is going to have to wait. But the young people, they have that advantage. And of course, there are always more Chinese who speak Russian. There's probably as many Chinese who speak Russian as there are Russian. I mean, that's considering the population difference between the two of them. A little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. But I think there is still a tendency in Russia to think of themselves, particularly among the elite, as more a part of the West than they are a part of Asia, which I think is fair, or the heart of Eurasia. And that's the way I think the Russian elite are coming to a quick, short severance of that former almost colonial subject mindset in terms of cultural and intellectual hegemony with the West. And I think it's very important for the Russian government to have the foresight to realize that relations with the West will never go back to normal now, not in our lifetimes. It's impossible. And how important building up that relationship with China, and to a lesser extent, but also true with Iran. Because if Russia and China is the most important relationship, Iran is the junior partner that both now have strong strategic partnerships with, and I think is essential. And look, Russia has much smaller, using a realistic look at the world, geopolitical horizons than the Soviet Union. Okay, Russia is never again going to be a country that could be the hegemon, that could stride the world. And the Russian leadership, I think, is very, very cognizant of Russia's limited geopolitical horizons compared to the Soviet Union. But that said, they're still big enough, particularly with their strategic arsenal, their diplomatic heft. We all now, I think, fully realize the importance to the global economy of Russia's commodities, energy, metals, grain, fertilizer, the whole length, and how much that has been underestimated by people prioritizing a services economy and electronic consumer gadgets, and neglecting the importance, however base it is. And actually, oil and gas extraction is one of the most technically complicated and expensive economic endeavors in the world today. I mean, other than, of course, like AI creation or something that Russia is really lagging behind in, but it's actually very important. And Russia's commodity also is one of the things that gives it a heft on the world stage beyond its 150 million population size, compared to the United States or China. So Russia can play the kingmaker between the US and China. Not that I believe that China has global hegemonic intentions, right? Now or in the future. I don't think it's in Chinese history. I don't think it's in the Chinese nature. Regional, sure, right? Right? Just like Russia aspires to a degree of hegemony in their own region. And one of the best ways that I see this Russian-Chinese relationship, the hope for it, as the kernel of a multipolar world, or if the US keeps pressing things, the other side of a bipolar world, is the way they have managed their competing interests and relations in Central Asia, in the Central Asian states. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has been such a incredible and underestimated institution for doing that. The Russians, the Chinese, they were very pragmatic. They've got some competing interests. If you go to the base of power between each other in Central Asian states. But rather than trying to make it a wrestling match where, Kazakhstan is closer to China now, or Kyrgyzstan is closer to Russia, they have kind of given a delineation of duties, whereas it's recognized that China has the greater economic heft and the room for investment that Central Asian economies badly need, whereas the Central Asian elite, they still all speak Russian and they still learn Russian. And Russia has been granted the stronger point in terms of politics, culture, and military relations. But there hasn't been any real substantial competition or problems. Russia has not been upset that Chinese is investing lots of money in the Central Asian states. And China has not been upset about the formation of the Eurasian Union or the military alliance that still encompasses the area, led by Russia. So that is a very good way that they have managed their differences and actually made them complement each other. And that, more than anything, I've seen there. And God knows that the Central Asian elite can often be venal, petty, small-minded, self-interested leadership. God bless them. I love them. Even Turkmenistan, crazy little place that is, right? But Russia and China have been a very good job of kind of shepherding them without being overbearing and colonial about that. They still listen to them, right? They still, there's no sense that Russia or China are sucking up the sovereignty of Kazakhstan or something like that. And I think it's a much healthier relationship. There's no sense that you see like in the EU where the technocrats in Brussels want to erase the national identity of at least of Western Europeans. They're actually trying to build it up in Eastern Europe, but they're trying to erase the national identity. We're all just European, right? There's no sense of that in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I think it's a much healthier in terms of a respect for sovereignty, multilateral model for an institution of these type of relations.
So that was quite a bit that you laid out there, and what I'm getting from both you and Carl is that it isn't just a common threat that is maybe giving urgency to Chinese-Russian relations. They also do have a lot of common interests beyond that, and this is something that's been ongoing and being built up. And from what you're saying, Mark, and this is what I have observed, is that just look at the way China deals with every other country, or the way Russia deals with every other country in terms of foreign relations and economic cooperation, trade. That's how they do business. So why is anyone surprised that that's how they're doing business together with each other? It just doesn't make any sense for them. Like you say, wishful thinking. They have this wishful thinking that they will be mortal enemies, divide and destroy each other on their own, and the U.S. could just sit back and subordinate the pieces. Now, let's talk about the common threat here a little bit. My theory is that the U.S. is just simply out of time, and this is why they are picking a fight with both Russia and China at the same time. They simply have no more time. They are out of time. China's on the rise. Russia has stabilized. It has picked itself up after the 1990s, and that's why they're doing this. Not because it's the best option. It's the only option if they want to pursue hegemony. We'll start with Carl. What do you think about the reason behind the U.S. picking a fight with both Russia and China? And they clearly are obviously picking a fight.
Before I answer your question, I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Mark said about the complementary role Russia and China plays in surrounding countries. I mean, people can see that clearly in the case of Syrian war. Russia went in, military intervention, bailed out the Syrian government. China did not go in with military. Like a lot of people in the West are saying, oh, China is going to send its aircraft carrier. They're going to send the PLA. So that's not how China operates, right? And what China did was provide financial aid, and they provided financial assistance to the Syrian government. So that is another example where Russia and China, they did not butt heads, but they work together, just different. In different spheres. Russia came in with a military muscle. China came in with a financial muscle, and that's exactly how it worked out in Central Asia. I mean, despite say the difference in Russia and China, how they operate, and it turns out it worked out perfectly. And as for your question, Brian, why U.S. is picking a fight with both Russia and China and Iran? And, this is mind-bogglingly stupid to any, if aliens come from outer space, they'll be like, what the hell are these idiots in Washington doing, right? But it's, we have to realize, U.S., even U.S. is not like the single mastermind. It's just it's a collective oligarchy, right? It's a collective oligarchy running for the interest of all the founders. And U.S. cannot simply give up being antagonistic toward Russia and China, because U.S. built up this whole structure of NATO to contain Russia, first to contain Soviet Union, and later to contain Russia. And that NATO bureaucracy, the beast has to be fed. You can't just say, oh no, there's really no need to have this antagonistic relationship. No, Brian, there's jobs at stake here. People need to continually to fund their McMansions in Virginia. This you can't just give up a good gig like that. And this is why when people like John Mearsheimer, who trying to steer U.S. into reach a détente with Russia to focus on China, it doesn't work, because all the NATO bureaucrats, they still want to get paid. They're still going to get their palm grease from defense contractors, and this is how, in a way, this is how dysfunctional U.S. government is. everybody can understand what's the right thing, but that's not the right thing if you want to get ahead in the system. If you want to, get rich, and in U.S. it's all about getting rich. So screw the so-called, when they talk about national interest, they're not talking about national interest of average American working class people. They're talking about the national interest of Raytheon, Rocky Martin, whoever is paying their bills, and they're talking about national interest of their pocketbooks. So I mean, this is a real reason why U.S. is. And another reason is hubris, because a lot of the Washington elite felt we're doing this because we can. It's like, why? Another way of answering Brian is like, why do dogs eat shit? Because he can, and that's how U.S. works, unfortunately. Back to you,
okay.
Mark.
Yeah, Mark, I would like to hear your insight on this. Basically, Carl is saying this, it's a tropism. It has a life of its own. And many people point out it has no reverse gear, even when it seems common sense demands it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Carl makes a lot of good points when he talks about there is a certain impetus in the institutions like NATO that there's simply in the interests of pursuing careers and lifelong vendettas and so forth, where I believe that the Western governments are quite often the victims of their own propaganda. There's a feedback loop. These Russian and Chinese experts that they have that keep this fueling drive towards hegemony. It is amazing how actually ignorant I know they are of Russia, and I assume the same is true of China. But they keep fueling the cycle where the politicians listen to the experts, and the experts are paid by the big military industrial complex and the companies and the revolving door back and forth, and it all keeps churning along. And they live in a fantasy world that is very much diverged from reality. And so they quite often keep underestimating Russia and China. And I think it plays out again and again. But particularly when Carl mentioned hubris, I think he touched there on another at least equally important factor on why the U.S. cannot give up the full-throated pursuit of hegemony without any realist reflection, balancing, in geopolitical terms. And it's actually ideology. And I think that's a very important distinction between the leadership in the U.S. right now and the leadership in Russia and China, is that the U.S. is still driven by ideology. I think they are more driven by ideology today than they were during the Cold War, when there still was a realist element quite dominant in U.S. foreign policy elite, the blob of yesteryear. Whereas Russia and China, they are pragmatic. They are cold-blooded. They are very cynical about the world. They have no illusions towards the reach of their respective countries. No, they don't tell themselves the same type of wishful thinking lies. But the ideology that the U.S. political elite have is exceptionalism. And it's not just the U.S. anymore. The Europeans have their own brand of exceptionalism, right? Where they see the U.S. as the muscle, right? The heft, but they are the more morally superior, and they need to guide the U.S. to be the strong arm of U.S.-led Western global hegemony. And you saw this when Donald Trump was in office, and the Europeans were so aghast that their hegemonic master, right? These client states were upset that their master was not behaving as they expected it to. And the relief that the European elite felt when Joe Biden was elected and the U.S. started acting like they expected them to was absolutely palpable. But what drives it, their inability to compromise, their inability to entertain any realist perspective of international relations thinking, is they really believe that they are morally and systemically superior to anyone else in the world, and certainly to Russia or China. They believe that they not only have the right, but the duty to fashion the world, right? They believe that everyone in Russia and China in the long term that survives the process will be better off if they look more like Americans, those obese, McDonald's shuffling, right? We've all been there. I still bear a little bit of that that victim myself, right? They really believe this, and this feeds into that expert political thinking diversion from reality. They have no idea how people in Russia and China live. They really believe that they're all just waiting to be liberated by a good Western liberal, right? They just need to have their own elites brainwashing removed from them. And this type of neo-colonialist mindset, it's not just, of course, with regards to Russia and China, but it's the way they view relations with every other country in the world. And it makes them have the inability to entertain common sense, realist compromise, concessions, considerations of sharing and balance of power. You can't have a partnership with the U.S. You are either a client state or you're an enemy. And that's it. They have an inability. The blob really does think that way. And everything in my experience in the military and studying, in these elite Western foreign policy circles, at the LSE, where I talked to all of them, I met all of them. They all come to the LSE, all these thinkers, and speak, if only because Oxford is a little bit further away from London. So everyone who comes through goes there, and I use my time there to go to a lot of the passing through politicians and thinkers and experts who come through, and I again and again, and I see this mentality. They all really have it. And it leads them in this hubris, this belief in their own moral and political superiority. They do not see the flaws that their own system has relative to anyone else. They have an inability to even recognize their own hypocrisies. And when they do it, it's not a hypocrisy. That's the way they see it.
It's a missionary zeal. It is. U.S. was started as by the Puritans, and that missionary zeal never went away. It just went from the zest for Christianity to spread Christianity all over the world, to spread democracy and free. We now just substituted the democracy and freedom as the new religion. Now we got, instead of spreading Christ, we're spreading democracy and freedom. This is a new secular liberal religion.
And now postmodern liberalism as well, as the only way to entertain that democracy and freedom, the only true system, the wokeism.
And if you actually ask them what freedom is, I mean, people are just citing freedom almost like a mantra. But if you actually questioning, digging a little deeper, what do you mean? Just getting on the internet without being being suspended by Twitter, or do you mean you can be a government whistleblower like Snowden or Assange? I mean, people will say, no, these guys are enemy of the freedom. They're a threat to our freedom. the freedom just became a totally meaningless slogan. It's ideology. It's a religion.
Yes. So, Mark, you're discussing a very uncompromising system of exceptionalism, and as power shifts from the U.S. to China, China is a bigger country, more people, larger industry, larger everything, and it's inevitable that they're going to surpass the United States. But because of the mentality, the ideology of the elite in the United States, they cannot accept this, no matter how irrational it is to resist China's rise. They will do it because of this mindset. Now, I want to go back to something because I want to talk about Ukraine now, because a lot of analysts in the West believe that Ukraine might be some issue they could divide Russia and China over, and I think no, it's absolutely not. It's the opposite. What the U.S. has created in Ukraine, this proxy war, it is a warning to China that this could be what happens to China next. And so China is not going to divide with Russia over this. But Carl, you were talking about Syria, how Russia went in with the military and how China leveraged its financial and economic power. And I believe the exact same thing is happening regarding Ukraine. They say China is not helping Russia, and Russians are wondering, why isn't China doing more to help? They are helping. So Carl, Ukraine, do you think it's a divisive issue, or do you think it's something that's actually going to improve and build up ties?
I mean, again, that's just another like wishful thinking, like copium produced by your pundit circuits. Like it's almost all. I saw McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, was tweeting about, oh, why is China not why is China not helping on Ukraine? It's like, what do you want China to do? Like, why is China not helping on peace in Ukraine? Of course, China is helping peace in Ukraine by not sending weapons. Unlike some countries like United States, you're flooding the country with weapons. You're killing. That's only going to lead to getting more Ukrainians killed. China is doing the responsible thing by not by not doing that. But that's not what they want. They want China to hop in the Western bandwagon, right, to gang up on Russia over Ukraine. So once they bring down Russia, then all the West alliance can then gang up on China. I mean, like, this is obvious, like night and day. You think the Chinese leaders are stupid? I mean, like maybe they're really that dumb. They think they can. Oh, I'm gonna pull a wool over your eyes. You'll never see this coming. No, I mean, come on. This is a problem with the people in Washington with that hubris we talk about. They really think they know better. They know better than the Russian leaders. They know better than the Chinese leaders. But most often, they don't even know. They don't even know better about themselves. They don't even know better about U.S.'s own limitations. And they're the ones driving the policy, unfortunately. But okay, enough ranting about the U.S. politicians and think tankers and pundits, because I can go on forever on that. Ukraine, why should China, care about Ukraine? Look at the map; it's so far from China. This is none of China's business. China would. There's no war. China, before the conflict, China is doing business with Ukraine, doing business with Russia. China was actually trying to purchase an aircraft company from Ukraine, and guess what? U.S. pressure Ukrainian government to stop the deal, and that happened again and again. And why then would China work with United States on Ukraine? Just so its interest will get trampled over and over when China could just continually buy Russian oil and gas. I mean, the choice is clear. I mean, I don't get it. It's like it's they're just repeating over and over what they hope would happen, and then they're like little babies. They're getting upset that is not actually happening. Like, China is not following through their wish list. It's like, sorry, China is not your Santa Claus. Besides, you're having a naughty kids. You don't get nothing.
I think the Chinese leadership, and I want to set this up for you, Mark. I think the Chinese leadership understands what the crisis in Ukraine is actually about. It's about the U.S. overthrowing the elected government in 2014, installing a client regime in its place, and transforming it into a national security threat to Russia right on its border, deliberately so. And it's not entirely unlike the situation in Taiwan, and we can talk about that in depth. But Mark, Ukraine, do you think that this is a wedge issue between Russia and China, or do you think this is an area of common interest that they are obviously going to work together on? And is China leveraging its financial and economic might to help Russia in ways other than sending military aid? There's more than one way to aid a country when it's at war. Mark?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it cannot be underestimated the parallels between the situations with Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan. Now, of course, there are differences in the particulars, but Ukraine and Taiwan are both being weaponized against the respective peer or near peer competitors of the U.S. in the same way. And the Russian and Chinese leadership are certainly smart enough to realize that at this point. Yes, Russia focuses more on Europe and China focuses more on the Pacific in the US, but they have their backs set against each other with a reliable partner now. The borders between them are completely demilitarized and demarcated, right? This was actually something that the Russian leadership, starting with Boris Yeltsin, did in the early 2000s, carried through with Putin. They recognized how much they needed a good relationship with China, and they delimited their borders with a token show of respect, I think, to China. In that, yeah, we've got these long-standing border disputes over a few little wilderness islands on a river in a region of both of our countries that very few people actually want to live. China, you can have that island for historical reasons, for whatever, to make peace, right? And that, I think, that simple show of respect to China and a very slight handing over of the smallest amount of territory, recognizing the historical wrongs that Russia did to China back when they were a colonial power and empire, was very much appreciated in China, and that set the tone of it going forward. So I think the Russian and Chinese leadership realize how much, and the economic complementarianism that Carl Zha mentioned goes very well to this. They have each other's back. Obviously, China is not going to send troops to Ukraine or to Syria, and likewise, in a future conflict over Taiwan, Russia would the focus of their power is not to the east. They would have very limited ability to help China in that. They do have a pretty significant submarine fleet in the Pacific that might play an unexpected role in that type of scenario. But likewise, that's not what Russia and China can do for each other. What could happen is if NATO goes full scale into Ukraine, right? If it becomes a direct NATO-Russia military conflict, I think the Chinese leadership would realize that the only thing they could do at that point is to do something they really don't want to do, which is move on Taiwan in force, because that two-sided confrontation is the only thing that would then save Russia, long term. I think that right now in Ukraine, China is actually paying, without direct military assistance, is playing a much more important role than people realize. China is continually increasing the amount of oil and gas and coal and other commodities that they are buying from Russia in ever increasing volumes. The India too as well. And India has been actually unexpectedly very helpful to Russia there. But if it wasn't for China not backing Western sanctions and not for the increase in their purchasing of Russia's commodities, giving Russia someone else to sell these commodities to other than Europe, the Russian economy would not be where it is today and would not have withstood sanctions the way it is. So you really can't underplay the importance of what China is doing economically in those terms. Sure, I, like many Russians, would like to see China do more. I would like to see China producing artillery shells the way that the West never could match, right? I think Russia's managing it right now as well, but then there would be no question, or rockets or something else. But China is keeping their economy strong by limiting the amount of economic damage. They're already under enough sanctions by the U.S. Both Russia and China have not insurmountable, but serious issues with the U.S. trying to monopolize and leverage the global semiconductor industry and market over each other. Russia and China really need to work together on joint complementary semiconductor industries. Obviously, China has the much bigger role there, but I'm sure that Russian technology can play an important part. And actually, Russia produces a number of gases and material components that are the primary source for the semiconductor industry around the world. So, they have an important role to play there. And I suspect there is a lot more happening in the gray area. I know, just anecdotally, my wife is in business. She's a marketing director for a Russian company now. And the Chinese their Chinese contacts are telling them, you have problems getting some components, some things, some supplies from the West. We can help you. We can act as a middleman and get them for you to help you get around sanctions. Or we'd be even happier to set up whole factory lines and provide permanent import substitution as well. And it's all happening under the table. And I suspect that it is happening in particular with semiconductors, which is helping enable Russia to keep producing the cruise missiles, the drones, the military components they need to keep pounding the U.S. client state in Kiev, their electrical infrastructure. So again, I would love to see China do more, but I think they are doing enough. And I think there is a lot of cooperation, understanding that each other, China does have to maintain a degree of remove from its biggest banks and so forth. But they're setting up small disposable ones to accomplish the same things. And a lot of it is happening underneath the table, as it were. And without Chinese doing what they're doing economically right now, Russia would not have the economic ability to be where they are in the conflict today.
And also, the Chinese leader can see what the effect of the U.S. sanctions and the way that's implemented against Russia. Those sanctions could easily be applied to China, and the way that U.S. just decides to freeze the Russian central bank reserves, right? China has a lot of money, that's being, in the control of those that could be subject to the U.S. seizure, the way they seize the freeze the Russian money. So China is watching this going down, and there's no way they will be on board with that, to support U.S. in that effort. The sanction against Russia, in fact, a lot of the U.S. congressmen went to Europe. They're actually trying to tie Ukraine and Taiwan issue together. They're saying, we need to develop those financial regulations like the ones that we are currently applying against Russia right now, that we could use to sanction China in case of a conflict over Taiwan. They're already laying the groundwork. Whatever that, all this U.S. financial weaponry that developed in their sanction against Russia, they could easily turn around and use against China. And that is why I think it was an encouraging sign that Russia and China, they're finally starting to switch into the using the yuan to settle their trade. And that will be a big step toward independence from U.S. Financial manipulations. Because let's face it, one of the main pillars of U.S. hegemony right now is its financial dominance. I would argue it's even more than its military and its tech, because the U.S. sanction is really its power is really financial sanction, because the whole world right now, the whole global trade rests on U.S. dollar as reserve currency. That means you have to, that mean when you have your asset in U.S. dollars, that could result them being seized by decree, by a fiat from the U.S. government, and we have seen that happening, and that's so the de-dollarization could not come faster, and that's one area definitely Russia and China is working on. And guess what happened after Russia and China start to settle their trade in yuan? Now we're having Xi in Saudi Arabia saying, hey, hey, you can we can buy your oil with yuan too. So I mean, this is really like the beginning of a trend, but it's pretty big. It's huge actually, because prior to the conflict, there's only a small percentage of the Russia-China trade that's been settled in yuan, and now there's a huge switch over, and that's just gonna get that percentage is gonna get bigger and bigger, because the Russian businessmen, they don't want to have their asset being seized by European and U.S. banks, arbitrarily. Better have their U.S. is not a safe currency anymore. It's not the currency reserve that it's cracked up to be. So yeah.
You look at the Saudis. They know very well that what is being done to Russia could be done to them, right? That's why they are buying Russian oil, then reselling it to the West for a profit, right? Using it for their own domestic purposes. That's why they are doing business, with the Chinese and switching away from the dollar, because MBS has, I believe, a great deal of personal animosity towards Biden, but also the Saudis want room for maneuver. And I think they're starting to realize that a world more weighted towards Russia and China kind of way, everyone sits down at the table and has a say in how the world is ordered, might be better for them in the long term than even the status of a preferential vassal state with the U.S. And I think the MBS's whole deal with Hasagi and everything has helped get him to that particular perspective. And whatever we may think of the Saudi regime, and I have no particular love for it. I think they're showing a little bit of foreign policy maturity and intelligence that I didn't expect for them. And the same thing goes for Iran. China is learning now from the way the U.S. is pursuing their economic warfare against Russia, right? And it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when it will be done to China, right? And the Chinese know that. The same way Russia is looking at how Iran has survived the last decade plus of sanctions on them. And that is why Russia is increasing their strategic partnership with Iran. Iran is giving Russia the designs for the Shahed 136. And everything I'm hearing is that Russia was also using for the first time the Arash drones in the last big salvo as well. Also, there's a couple of ballistic missile models. Is it because that these designs are superior to Russian weapons? Like in the general sense? No. It's because they're cheap. And Iran has developed these weapons under the penalty of U.S. sanctions, cutting them out of the ability. So whatever the West may claim, they're easily able to be domestically produced despite the full thrust of Western sanctions. And Russia saw firsthand the Russian military was working with the Iranian military in Syria, and they saw, these drones, they may be cheap, but they're pretty effective. And they've recognized it at this point and said, hey, can we get some more of that now? Actually, can we just get the rights and redesign them ourselves? And at the same time, Russia is, we hear this from the Western press, from the New York Times, the Washington Post, John Kirby screaming about the unprecedented strategic partnership developing between Russia and Iran. Iran is getting the Su-35 and supposedly air defense, advanced air defense system from Russia. And if they're getting advanced air defense, Iran already has the S-300. You know what that means? That's the S-400. And this anti-access area denial systems, the way the U.S. military experts refer to them, the S-400, the best air and missile defense system in the world. It is a guarantee of sovereignty against the way the U.S. likes to fight wars. They like to fight wars with standoff strikes, with cruise missiles, with air power, and so forth. And these systems prevent them from striking and bombing a country with impunity. They raise the costs. It's not that the U.S. couldn't eventually, if they mobilized their entire vast air systems, couldn't overwhelm an integrated S-400 air defense system. They could, but the cost is prohibitive. And that's why China has wanted the S-400. That's why if Russia provides it to Iran, which I think would be the perfect response now. You want to arm Ukraine to kill Russians? Well, we're going to arm Iranians to remove your hegemony in the Middle East. Let's see how the Israeli jets and strikes and your strikes do against the S-400 in Iran. And it could go, and with Russia providing their best fourth and fifth gen fighter aircraft as well. They're changing the balance of power, and it is very much a quid pro quo. But at the same time, the Russians or Iranians, with a combat relationship forged in Syria under fire, have new appreciation for what they can offer each other. And of course, behind both Russia and Iran is the economic assistance of China, without which neither one of them would have that room for maneuver. And if the inclinations of the political leadership of Russia and Iran enable them to, get a little dirty with the West and actively challenge them, and the mentality of the Chinese leadership, mostly coming from the engineer basis, leads them to take a standoff and provide Russia and Iran with the economic assistance to be able to get dirty with the West and actively resist them. That's something that Russia is willing to accept, that relationship. The Russian government is fully aware that the difference between now and the Sino-Soviet honeymoon is that Russia is the junior partner, and they're perfectly okay with that. The West says, oh, you'll just be a commodity appendage and a vassal of China. Well, that's not our experience from the way that the Chinese leadership do business with us and with other people. But even if it were true, better a vassal to them than to you.
Yes, and I just want to point out that we were talking earlier about how Western analysts, the blob in Washington, how they create this fantasy world, and part of it is claiming that Russia or China is doing this fence sitting regarding Ukraine and regarding its relationship with Russia. But in reality, and as we can see, they're trying to buy time. They want to hold off these. They know the sanctions are going to come for them eventually. Everyone knows that the U.S. is out of time. They are desperate. They are dangerous. These sanctions are coming for everyone who does not fully cooperate with them. They're trying to buy time. There is no fence sitting. I think the decision is long since been made.
I'm sure you've seen the articles. How many articles have you seen by Western foreign policy experts arguing actually the parallel between Ukraine and Taiwan and making the argument that if NATO, if the West loses in Ukraine, that means that they will lose in Taiwan?
Yeah, and it's all part of an admission that the U.S. seeks to encircle and contain both Russia and China. It's an ongoing project since the end of World War II. It is something they have been investing in for decades. It's the common denominator that ties all U.S. foreign policy over all of these decades together. So we're over 1 hour. I want to ask one last question. Where do you see Russian-Chinese relations going into the future? We'll start with Carl.
Oh, I think there's plenty of area of cooperations. I mean, the de-dollarization is one big area. I mean, I can see that can be massively expanded when I can see in near future up to 50% of their bilateral trade could be done in yuan, like outside of dollars, completely avoiding dollars. And the strategic position, if people look at the map, they can look at map of Russia, China, and Iran. They share borders, land borders, right? I mean, like I saw some really dumb think tanker tweeting like, why is our Navy not intercepting the Iranian drone supply to Russia? I'm like, you're gonna send the U.S. Navy to the Caspian Sea? I mean, like, what are you gonna do? Airdraft the U.S. aircraft carrier into the Caspian Sea? This is a thing of the Eurasian land link, right? Because that's why China was very eager to build this up through Russia to Iran to build the railroad, to build the road networks. Because guess what? U.S. Navy can't do anything about it. These borders trade going on very briskly, and it's way outside any U.S. capability to interrupt. And I think this will only grow in the coming years, especially when now all sides, including the Moscow elite, they understand that what is coming. The U.S. is not their friends. This is and very similar. I think U.S.-China relationship have already, at least this year, have reached a point. I think a point of no return. I mean, up to the Biden's swear in, I think there's still a lot of hope that Trump was just a freak show, and then everything will return to normal once you get Trump out of the office. No, that did not happen. Biden just doubled down on Trump policy on China. So now I think Chinese leadership is beginning to understand. I think they always understood, but it's only confirmed their understanding that U.S. goal ultimately is to contain China, no matter what. And there's so with that understanding, there's really no going back to the cool, everybody holding hands and sing kumbaya. So I think China-Russia relationship is only going to grow under that context. Like all these projections by the Western pundits about how Russia-China relationship is going to diverge is like yes, that's what you want to happen, but at the same time, you're doing everything you can to push them together even more, by all these insane U.S. actions against both countries. So I don't think that will change anytime soon. And I think going forward, there's just going to be tighter integration between Russia and China.
And Mark, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the economic is going to be the biggest measure of that, and the dealing in each other's currency with each other is the biggest part there. But there are other ones as well. The Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which is now being constructed. This is really essential for Russia because it will allow Russia to send all of the gas that would have gone to Europe to China instead, right? And not just the limited amount that it can, transfer via LNG and everything. Once that pipeline comes online, the Power of Siberia 2, and it has the groundwork is being laid now. That is a big game changer because then whatever reliance Russia had on the European economies in that energy, dual way relationship will be gone. And so I think that's really important. I think that the Russian Eurasian Union is going to become just a complementary subset of the Belt and Road Initiative. I think we're already seeing that happen, right? I'm a Eurasianist. I fully believe in the Eurasian Union, right? On economic and far beyond that. But I think it's clear that it's just going to become a subset, at least in economic terms, of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think the Russian leadership is on board with that because don't fight it if it's going to help pursue the same goals. The same thing, Carl brought up the north-south transit corridor with Iran through the Caspian Sea and then down to India, being billed as the sanction-proof trade network. I did a video on that just last week. I'm like, is the U.S. going to teleport the Fifth Fleet into the Caspian Sea to interdict Russian-Iranian trade? Yeah, it's not going to happen. But more than economic, I think it also needs to be cultural, right? I think there needs to be a lot more university exchanges, academic exchanges, students between Russia and China, so that the next generation of people that start to have roles in the governments, the foreign policy elite, and start looking to each other as allies. Not just in the sense that we have each other's backs, but more back to a brotherhood type relationship that was envisioned but never fulfilled during the Soviet honeymoon. And then the military relationship. And as we speak right now, the Russian and Chinese Navy are once again doing joint naval drills. I believe it's in the East China Sea right now. But we've seen joint bomber flights now become a regular occurrence over the Sea of Japan. All good for it. We've seen these regular exercises, not just with the SCO, but with China being invited to the Vostok exercises, Russia's big regular exercises in the east direction. Very important. And to show you how far the interoperability and the trust of this military relationship is going, Russia and China have had joint ballistic missile defense exercises every year since 2016. There is no greater degree of trust between two great powers, two nuclear armed powers, than doing joint exercises in ballistic missile defense. That is something that has been neglected and just ignored in a lot of corridors. But the amount of trust that shows between the two countries, the two militaries, I always take as a real sign of integration that a lot of people are missing. And we're going to see sometime in the next 10 to 15 years that window, the same period as that window of opportunity that the U.S. has to lash out to try and maintain its hegemony, however futilely, before the economic imbalance with China starts to lean too heavily the other way. Military power always following, lagging behind, but always following economic power. There was just a paper out by the Pentagon in the last 2 months arguing now, we've done the reassessment. We can no longer beat China straits. We can't do it. That's already there. And that's a big change. And that's why the U.S. is actually now considering a scorched earth policy for Taiwan. They've written papers about it. It's all the topic right now in the foreign policy circles. They literally want to put self-destruct devices in the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. They're trying to move production to Arizona right now. But, what is already there, they want to literally put explosives in it so that if China is provoked enough, and I know China does not want to reunify with Taiwan forcibly, but the U.S. has no intention of letting it happen peacefully. They want to provoke that conflict. They will not accept anything else. And in the case that it breaks out, they want to deny the prize of Taiwan's enormous semiconductor manufacturing industry to China. And I don't know if the Taiwanese people are really on board with their country becoming scorched earth for the U.S. It shows how much importance, what the U.S. considers really important in their geopolitical conflict. But I think that in that same time period, we are going to see in some conflict area, probably not direct conflict with NATO, with the U.S., but we're going to see Russian and Chinese troops deployed alongside each other in some conflict zone, probably in Eurasia, in the next 10 to 15 years. I'm sure of it.
I look forward to the Russian-China joint freedom of navigation exercises off the coast of California. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Between Catalina Island and the California
They already
coast.
did one towards Alaska, just off the Alaskan islands.
Yeah, just a little bit south. Just come a little bit south.
Yeah. Okay, well, with that, I think we covered a lot of ground. We kept it relatively short, around 1 hour. I really want to thank both of you, Carl and Mark, for coming on. One last thing, Carl, you first, then Mark. Please tell the audience where they can find and follow your work.
Hi, I'm Carl Zha. I have a YouTube channel. You can find me there. I also run a podcast, the Silk and Steel podcast, where I go more into depth into the history, culture, and politics of China. I'm currently doing a chronological retelling of the Chinese history all the way from beginning. I'm already up to 627 BC. Have a long way to go, but I also have a series on the Chinese Civil War. I just finished the Chinese Civil War Manchurian Theater. I'm starting another series on the Chinese Civil War Northern China. Just come check me out. It's on Patreon. Go to Patreon, search Silk. It's the first podcast will be Silk and Steel podcast by yours truly, and I would really be grateful if you come subscribe and be my page, support my lifestyle in Bali. Yes.
Yes, and the links to both Carl and Mark's, all of their accounts, every way to find and follow their work will be in the video description below, and also a comment pinned at the top of the comment section. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I just want to say that that we should have sometime a similar talk on the history of the relations, because I was trying to buff up on the Russian-Chinese history in case we went into that today, because I knew Carl would school me on that. And I discovered a little gem. I didn't know that the Chinese government actually sent forces to fight on the sides of the whites in the Russian Civil War. At the time, I think it was the Bayun government, or a pronunciation probably.
That's during the Allied interventions in the Russian Civil War, when because China was kind
the
of
polar bear expedition.
part of the Ally forces.
Yeah.
So they send some, they send a token force to the Russian Far East in Vladivostok, and what's that town on the river? I can never pronounce it. On the Amur River, Khabarovsk. I don't know. Anyway,
Khabarovsk.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. So yeah, anyway, so there's a lot to talk about there. There's a lot of cool little history that is never taught in American schools on Russian Chinese relations. So a lot of little gems there.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
Let's do
you
that.
can follow me on Twitter at Mark Sleboda 1. I'm most active still there. I'm on Telegram increasingly as well with Brian. I do political analysis interviews on Sputnik. I do 2 or 3 of them every weekday. So you can follow me on all of Sputnik's radio shows, The Critical Hour, By Any Means Necessary, Political Misfits, the other one, Fault Lines, etc. I try to put a couple of them up a week on my Substack. So I have a Substack as well. You can find some of my writing and some of my audio interviews there. And I also have a new, still kind of new YouTube channel, The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, where I do short pieces a couple times a week on, the current events, and that I'm still mastering video editing for. But I also put some of my links to some of my longer form interviews, like this one, like the ones I do with New Atlas, there post to the YouTube as well. So that's where you can find me, and occasionally on RT and CGTN and Press TV and all the usual.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming on. Again, everybody, please check out the video description below. There will be links to everybody's different accounts. And thank you for watching.